I am Bookface, and I'm ready to shoot some zombies. Resident Evil 4 is coming soon, so naturally I wanted to do a video on it. Not just because it's a popular topic, though that certainly helps, but also because Resident Evil 4 is the first Resident Evil game I played, and I have since gone on to play every Resident Evil game I could get my hands on. Still haven't found Code Veronica anywhere that I can actually play it. Someday. I've become a real big fan of the Resident Evil series. It's a pretty basic horror action game, all things considered, but I think that's kind of why I like it. Sometimes I just want a game that does all the tropey things, but just does them well. That's why I like Outlast. Another reason I really like Resident Evil is Resident Evil has a bunch of cool and absolutely horrifying monsters. So I'm excited to start working with it some, especially just before it gets its remake. Also, we're not going to talk about the Resident Evil 8 video I did that got like no views and nobody cared about. Also, if you didn't know, this series is called What Is This? Where I look at whatever kind of media with bizarre monsters that say they have folklore or look like they have folkloric inspirations, and I try to figure out what it is. So let's talk about the game itself. Unbeknownst to me when I initially bought this game, apparently this is one of the most popular games in the series Resident Evil. And after having played it, I absolutely see why. Resident Evil 4 has some incredible spooky moments with the Regeneradors and the village chief fight. God, that horrified me when I saw that transformation. Just, horrible. And the characters of Ashley and the Merchant are quite memorable. Also, Infinite Rocket Launcher. Woohoo! A classic. One thing that I think really helps this game stand out is the sort of folklore-y feel to it. Previously, with Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, there were zombies and supernatural creatures, and some obvious ties back to mythology, well, with creatures being called the Orthus and whatever, named after different mythological figures. This is, I think, the first game that really gives the idea of this local community with its own bizarre legends. In the simple fact that these aren't just things that vaguely resemble something else. These are things that resemble freaking nothing, and are so bizarre and specific, you're like, this has to be from something, right? The primitive nature of the weapons used by the Ganados, the simple dwellings, and the lifestyle gets this really older, simpler vibe. No technology, no hygiene. Most monsters in Resident Evil either fall into the category of general horror or weird sci-fi monster, but a lot of the things in this game don't. They have folkloric inspirations, from the obvious, like El Gigante, which is the giant, to some more complex ones. It's obvious that there's a lot more of a folkloric aspect to all this. I might just be talking in circles. We'll see if the editing can fix that. There are many creatures in Resident Evil 4 that people remember, but one that I think becomes kind of overlooked despite their undeniable importance is Las Plagas. Believe me, I wanted to do a video on the Regeneradors, but I couldn't find anything, and I was running out of time. I tried, I'm still looking, but it's not looking great. In Resident Evil 4, there isn't a virus. There's these living creatures that are monsters in their own right and also create new monsters. And there are just some details that seem odd, from the origins of the Plagas to the simple matter of how old they are based on certain things in the game, like cave paintings. It feels like there's more to the Plagas and how they work than just, a spooky monster. So let's look into that. So first off, we have to figure out what the Plagas are in their own right. Las Plagas are, simply enough, parasites. They're generally described as arthropod-like creatures, and in mine and probably most people's opinion, look very much like the facehuggers from Alien. They turn humans into ganados by latching onto the nervous system. Also, fun fact, I looked up what ganado means because I realized I didn't actually know, and I was very confused when it said cattle, because I'm like, that's kind of a weird thing. But it seems like it could also generally just mean livestock. So if I'm to interpret that in the context of the game, it is literally people being kept as livestock to feed the parasites, which is horrifying, but also interestingly thought out. After latching onto a host, the Plaga will take partial control of them by latching onto their nervous system. If the brain is destroyed, though, they take full control. There's some sort of creature from Spain, because that's the most basic thing we have. Though there are apparently theories that they originated in West Africa. These theories coming from Resident Evil 5, which also has the Plagas. And I can't really say either way, and To be completely honest, I didn't find out this was a theory until I was like almost done with this script, so I did not look into this one, but that was mostly because I was very confident in my answer. But if you're unsatisfied with my answer, check West African folklore. They're specifically from a remote mountainous region and were trapped away underground long ago, separated from people by a large moat. The Plagas, after many, many, many years, were found mummified, and then they adapted to spread in the form of spores, which, interestingly enough, also kind of lines up with Alien. Plagas could only be removed in their earliest stages and would kill the host if you try to do that too late. Infestation can be a painful process and often causes changes to things like the eye color. People hosting a Plaga will have increased strength and durability, and they can communicate both directly and indirectly, with some of them just using, language. I was going to say English, but no, they speak Spanish. Well, there's also something the Plagas can connect through, like some high frequency whatever. It's not that important. They're weak to UV/daylight and radiation. And physically, when they appear in the body, they appear as masses of flesh and tentacles. So just kind of a horrible eldritch abomination. It was a very thrown together, disorganized description of what the Plagas are, and I might rearrange that in editing so it sounds a little more coherent. Honestly, we know what the Plagas are. There are only a few things in that I think are really important to go over, but, I like to get my full story. Finally, on to the research. So, as usual, skip to this point in the video if you don't want to hear me ramble about research, though that is kind of the point of the series. So this research was kind of out of order and a bit odd. So instead of me researching a creature based on the features of the Plagas and then trying to find a match, I instead found this while just looking up general mythology from Spain, specifically because I wanted to do a video on Resident Evil 4. It was sort of a different process, but there's a little more to it, and once again, despite the fact that this series is kind of entirely based around research, I wish to point out that this is going to be particularly exhausting, so feel free to skip if you'd rather not hear the crazed rant incoming about my research process. So my starting point, obviously, was Spain, which I thought would be pretty simple. It was not. Turns out there are actually a lot of different people groups from Spain, which I was not aware of, which meant I had way too many sources to look through. And keep in mind, that's just Spain. There are other cultures that I could connect. So the total list of cultures that I had to look through in order to possibly find different things for this game included, but was not entirely limited to, Spanish, medieval European, Japanese, since Resident Evil comes from a Japanese company and they've put a bunch of yokai inspiration on it. If you don't believe me, watch Gaijin Goomba, he does a very good job explaining it. Aragonese, Andalusian, Asturian, Basque, Guanche, Castilian, Catalan, Lusitanian, Cantabrian, Extremaduran, Galician, Romani, Iberian, Portuguese, generally Hispanic, so just any Spanish-speaking country. And then finally, Mesoamerican. This actually had a specific reason because there's a mural in one of the caves that very much looks Aztec-inspired, like not just from the things happening, but also just like the art style specifically made me think of Mesoamerican cultures. Now, it is fully possible that I am just an idiot who overthinks things and I did not have to check all those cultures. I don't know why I say possible, that is absolutely the case. I wanted to be so thorough that I probably went overboard and just looked into way too much. Once I jumped down that rabbit hole, my pride would not let me drop it. So like I said earlier, I did try to research the Regeneradors because that is one of my favorite and most people's favorite monsters from Resident Evil 4. And since I didn't find anything on my initial look, I decided, okay, deep dive, look into everything that could be related. And oh boy, that went a lot. And the funny thing is, the one I actually landed on is one of the first things I found on, like, my basic look over of things. It's what we're talking about today. So that whole deep dive into every single culture vaguely related to Spain, and also Japan in there, it was just a complete bust, basically. So eventually I did find my topic, but the frustration does not end there. Now, if you haven't noticed, I speak English. And while I do know a moderate amount of Spanish, which comes from a high school Spanish class and inconsistent Duolingo, I do not really have that good Spanish, which became very relevant when this creature had some very sporadic and very obscure references, which haven't all been translated. Even stranger though, despite this being a creature from Spain, two of my biggest sources for this creature were written completely in French. So several headaches and many visits to Google Translate later, I literally copied out every word into Google Translate. I was just typing out like a full page of a big book in French into Google Translate. I'm tired. Finally, I got an acceptable level of information. I'm not sure if there's more or significantly more out there, but if there is, I'll get to it some other times. I have enough for the script to make my point. So, after that utter chaos of words that has me genuinely out of breath, allow me to introduce you to the real-world equivalent of Las Plagas, the animalitos. So the animalitos are creatures from Spain whose name translates to small animal. So we have the correct area and an accurate description, considering the only real description you could accurately give Las Plagas is it's a small animal and everything else is just pure guesswork. It kind of looks like an arthropod, but then it looks like a squid. They may be around 10 centimeters in height, but grow no larger than 2 or 3 feet tall. They have dark reptilian bodies, canine heads, and snouts with mouths like lizards and 2 elasticy arms. They're known to live in fresh water, often in marshes or in heaps of stones. Now, while the lizard and dog features are, not the same as the Plagas, the whole elastic arms thing kind of sounds like tentacles, which, is how you interpret the Plagas most of the time. They're typically very difficult to catch and are seen as incredibly agile and fast. And from someone who has, in a blind panic, just completely unloaded as these things skitter along menacingly, that is a very accurate detail. Interestingly enough, the animalitos were often seen as helpful to people. When the practice of bleeding a patient was thought to be a good idea, animalitos would commonly be used as a substitute for leeches. Wooden toys of them were also thought to repel cauchemars, and that might either mean the mythical creature, a cauchemar, or just nightmares, since that's what it directly translates to. And these little replicas would also be placed on children's graves. This doesn't have a particular connection to Las Plagas, but my thought is, so the Plagas formed a cult, right? I mean, they didn't form it, but they got power because a cult decided that was a good idea. And I feel like it's very fitting that a cult would get a creature that is supposedly helpful, but only if you believe in a very archaic and inaccurate way of healing people by draining their blood. I feel like that's notable. They are thought to attack body parts of swimmers and drink the blood that spills as a result of those attacks. They're also known to lay in wait among piles of gorse plants, with their eyes on the surface of the mud and wait for people or animals going to get water or to bathe. They could also become addicted to the blood of a particular patient even after they've healed, and if they accidentally drained too much blood and killed someone, that person's soul would go to hell. So, yeah. Helpful, big quotes, but very shady. That's a bit of a risky endeavor, trying to get an animalito to heal you. They are sometimes thought to be the souls of the disrespectful who were tortured and killed during the Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition!
Some believe they start out as foufele, which is the French version of a will-o-wisp, basically, but have no light and instead cling to the vermin of the earth. Both of these explanations are kind of medieval in a sense, and considering the whole medieval style of the game, I feel like it's fitting. Granted, this is a very loose connection, if it's even a connection. During the winter, they're thought to cover themselves in mud and strips of snakeskin. I don't know why I said mud like that. They also curl themselves into a small ball and stick themselves in cracks of monasteries and cemeteries. So, the thing about covering themselves in mud and snakeskin, I did it again, could relate to the fact that the Plagas remained dormant underground for years in a sort of mummified state, essentially preserving themselves. And the whole thing about them hiding in the cracks of monasteries and cemeteries, I dare you to go 5 minutes in that game without finding something relating to a monastery / religious building or a cemetery.
I dare you.
So yeah, they definitely hang around the same areas. They're often owned and controlled by sorcerers. They're contained in reeds that are knotted on one end and have a cork covering the other. They demand human flesh, especially if that flesh is from a cursed person, or the flesh of unbaptized children when held in captivity. Alright bro, you need to calm down. The sorcerer controlling the animalito must feed them every 24 hours, and if the proper child's flesh cannot be obtained, the sorcerer has to give their own flesh to feed the creature. So a lot of connections here, controlled by sorcerers. You seen the freaking magic man that Salazar likes to see himself as? Wait, is it Salazar? No, Salazar is we'll get to that later. Sadler. Look at Sadler with his wizard robe and staff. This dude thinks he's a sorcerer. And you know, the whole demand for human flesh, do I really need to say it? They're thought to lead people to damnation by granting them their worst wishes, and could be used to attain all that they desire. The way I interpret that is sort of like a monkey's paw kind of thing. Oh sure, you'll have exactly what you want for a horrible price. People hosting an animalito may have remarkable strength and speed, and possibly hardened skin. I'm kind of unsure about that one because the direct translation from this French book that I read says, "They are known to make someone hard," as the expression says. That is a direct quote. I'm choosing to assume this is talking about hardening the skin, like armor, because I'd hate to see a version of Resident Evil with the other interpretation. So there's one specific account of the Animalitos that tells us quite a bit. So basically, this dude who, I can't remember what the term was, but basically he ran with horses, so you have to run a lot. And he got sick with something that made it harder for him to breathe. So he got himself an Animalito. I don't know how, but he did. And he became incredibly fast and super strong, but his bones seemed to poke through his skin and his eyes widened immensely. And the conclusion to be drawn from that story is that the Animalito was consuming him from the inside out. So it's Parasite. And this is pretty much exactly what the Plaga does. It gives crazy power to the Ganados, but I mean, look at these things. And here's the one that really makes me go, And it sounds very weird, but I think it's something to note. So another interesting account of the Animalitos suggested that Napoleon Bonaparte was actually affected by an Animalito, and that's what kept him from being killed while in Spain. Now this seemed very bizarre and unrelated to the game, because, I mean, what does this game have to do with Napoleon Bonaparte? Oh, hello, Raymond Salazar. Interesting hat and outfit and height you have there. Now, this could be coincidental, but it seems like a really weird coincidence that this major villain looks like a very weird caricature of Napoleon with, a zombie skin on. Animalitos, in their own right, could be killed by most typical means, and would choke to death in any water polluted by oil. Host of the Animalitos, however, could only be killed with a silver bullet made from a coin that had a cross on it, or a bullet made from the melted wax of a candle used during mass. So specifics aside, this is also pretty accurate to the Plagas. Hosts of the Plagas, the Ganados, are incredibly hard to kill. You can get a dozen headshots and they'll still keep fighting. But the Plagas themselves, when they come out in their little skittery form, just shoot them. They're done. So much easier to kill. And there's my case for the Plagas. So even though this conclusion isn't as solid as some previous answers I've gotten, I feel fairly confident in saying that the Plagas are very close representations of the Animalitos. Now, whether this was intentional or pure accident and just completely unrelated, and I'm just drawing a lot of weird conclusions, that could absolutely be the case. I always find it a really fun Easter egg if there's some obscure mythological thing placed in a game and you just kind of have to interpret. But like I said, I very well could be wrong. There's a whole route I didn't go down with the whole theory of West Africa being the origin of the Plagas. There are a bunch of people groups from Spain that I didn't look into as specifically. I didn't find everything on all those people groups. And there are some routes I just didn't look down fully. If you have any other theories about what the Plagas could be, if they're related to mythology, put it down in the comments. Anyways, I'm gonna be playing Resident Evil very soon. As soon as I can, I'm gonna be playing it. Who knows, maybe they'll add some new stuff and I'll be able to make another video. I do have one other video in mind that involves not a monster in Resident Evil 4, but a very specific character. Stranger. Guess you'll just have to let me know in the comments if you want to see that. If you like this video, please give a thumbs up, comment down below, and subscribe. If you like the information that I shared and want to learn more about the Animalitos and other creatures from mythology, consider checking out my website, linked in the description. It has all my research, tons of sources, a bunch of drawings, all in a much more professional format that's not me making crappy jokes on the internet. Also, if you think I deserve to be paid for any of this, there'll be a link to Patreon in the description too. Anyways, I'll see you next time. Bye!